Welcome back to another episode of The Hip. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today. Today I was delighted to be joined by Geeta Nanda, Chief Executive of Met Thames Valley Housing. We talk at length about her tenure in the G15 as chair. We talk about how Met Thames Valley have done a massive development programme to create much needed housing in the borough. And we've also looked at some of the future of housing and what's changed over the 30 years of her career and some of the things she's looking forward to in the future. I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you do, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. Geeta, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
As you probably know, as we always like to start, if you just mind by giving us an introduction to yourself, please.
Well, I'm a bit of an old-timer, really. Old-timer in the sector. People sort of say, they have these amazingly interesting careers that span all these different sectors. And I would say, I'm a bit of a housing person through and through. So, yeah, I've been in housing, over 30 years now, and kind of done a whole range of different jobs in housing associations. Started off in local authority, then worked in housing associations, and I've done everything from sort of management, frontline management, into new business development and, core operations, including sales and all sorts of things. So, yeah, I'm a housing person through and through, but I seem to have done every job going.
Love it. And I mean, I always like to know this, but fall into it, or did you choose housing as a sector? How did you get into it in the first place?
No, I like everybody I know, because in that, when I joined, it wasn't a very well-known sector. So I don't think I know anyone who kind of decided they wanted to work in a housing association or work in housing. So I did actually, my sister worked for the GLC many years ago, and it looked like such fun. She just seemed to party all the time. And I thought, that looks pretty good. And so anyway, the GLC closed before I could get there. So I looked at local authorities. There was a sort of graduate trainee scheme. And it was quite a grand affair, really. You kind of worked in 3 different directorates within the local authority, and they kind of made out you were going to be chief exec of a local authority within 5 years or something. And when I got there, they put me in the housing department, and so I got to work in local authority housing department, and then they put me into finance. And as you can probably tell, I think housing was of greater interest to me than finance. And I ended up doing some research in housing, going to work for an organisation as a researcher, and then walked into a housing association and just immediately felt comfortable. I thought local authority wasn't really me, a bit bureaucratic. When I walked into a housing association, I immediately felt comfortable, and have kind of stayed ever since, doing different jobs, but definitely fell into it. I would never, ever have thought about doing that unless I did this graduate trainee scheme and ended up in housing.
I think most do. I've not had many people say they chose it as a career. I'm hoping eventually we'll change the narrative on that a little bit in the sector. But and how important do you think it's been for you before you became chief executive to do that variety of roles? Has that been important in the grounding of your career, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's been really important, because when I go around the organisation, I actually understand what people do. And you can walk around with people and, of course, learn about what they do. But because I've sort of grown up in housing, I've got a really good understanding when we do a project which is fixing service charges or, planned repairs programs. So I've actually sat there and worked on some of these projects before I know how complicated they are. I understand how things fit together. And I think that's a great advantage, because when you talk to your colleagues in the organisation and you say, I remember doing that, I remember how complex that was. Gosh, that's much harder than when I used to be doing that job. We didn't have so many more vulnerable people in those days, or it just kind of, people sort of think, she's done my job, she kind of gets what I do. So I definitely think it's been a benefit, but it's also good to have people with no knowledge who come in and ask all those basic questions, because sometimes I think you can get a bit so used to what you do and how you do it that you need fresh thinking to come in and mix it up a bit.
I agree. And I think, 30 years in the sector, there must have been some key milestones in that journey, but how does the sector look today as it did back then, would you say? What's been some of the big changes in that period, would you say?
Well, how people dress, definitely. It was very much Jesus sandals and fluffy jumpers. It was, years ago, it was very, very, very...
was it?
Yeah, it was, right. Because it was a very relaxed environment, I would say. And this was before the days, really, of private finance. Then once... private finance was introduced, you went to the money markets and bond markets, and things have got a lot more complicated in terms of how we fund social housing, the business models, the size of organisations. You didn't have housing associations of the size and scale you've got now. With that, comes more complexity, comes more professionalisation. So I think it's changed a lot, but also, over that time, I don't think there hasn't been a year I've worked in housing where we haven't said there's a housing crisis. Just feels like the whole of my career there's been a housing crisis. Yeah, because there's just never been enough. I remember when I bought my first flat, with my sister, scrimped and saved, didn't have much of a deposit. We had to buy this. Honestly, it was horrible, the flat we got. It was so horrible. It was all we could afford. It was on a main road with a railway line behind it and all sorts of things. But, renting, you couldn't rent. You didn't have the beautiful build-to-rent sector you have now. It was horrible private rental. You didn't have many options. And loads of families in temporary accommodation, loads of families. And in bed and breakfast, you had around Bayswater, you have all these big old buildings that were full of really poor bed and breakfast accommodation. Really? And then we moved to moving people into more better family homes as temporary accommodation. And then we've ended up moving people miles away from where they live into temporary accommodation. So you had around Waterloo Station, you had a big tented city with loads of tents and homeless people. Really? Around that whole area. So street homelessness was huge. So each time then we managed to solve some of those problems. We managed to solve street homelessness. We managed to get people better temporary accommodation. And then you have another flood, where you don't build enough homes and homelessness goes up and you can't, housing prices go up. So every year there's been a crisis, but it's slightly changed, I think, along the way as to who's most impacted and how. And back there again now, aren't we? What it feels. We've probably gone backwards in the last 12 months a little bit. So, what would you say some of the key achievements have been in that time? Because there's been so much happen from a business perspective for you in that time. But what have been some of your key achievements and some of the things that you've been really proud of that you've done in that period? Yeah, I think one of the key achievements was. We, as a housing association, we were the first people to set up a professional private rental sector. Yep. So whilst housing associations did have bits of market rental, it wasn't a branded bringing in investment from a broad private rental sector, which sort of kick-starts the whole build-to-rent sector. So I feel very proud that as a housing association, we showed that there were property managers, that they existed. Because there's people saying, there's no property managers, investors want to come into this space for private rental, but there aren't the operators to manage it. And we said, well, there are. This is what we do. This is how we do it.
Absolutely.
And could show that. I think that was a real milestone moment. But for me, the biggest achievements have been really around, how we have managed to help the poorest and grow our organisations to help more people. That's been the real success, really, has been, moving the sector from one of many, many small organisations, of which they do a fantastic job, but into sort of more professional organisations as well that can, bring in finance, that can really look at, those needs, work across different communities, partner with different organisations and, achieve more things at scale. I think that's been a really positive move.
Yeah, amazing. And I looked at, obviously, coming to the end of the tenure now, but I was interested to understand the G15 and being chair of the G15 and sort of how that 2 years has been. Have you had time yet to reflect, or has there not been the time available to think about what's happened in those 2 years yet?
It's been very busy. We've had 3 different prime ministers, endless housing ministers, so it feels like constantly you're explaining who you are and what you do and what the organisations do to a whole raft of different people. But I think, a couple of the things I think we've been really pleased with what we've managed to achieve is when they were looking at the rent position, we kind of put an argument forward to make sure we had a fair rent position. Right. That there are obviously cost of living pressures for our residents, but if we didn't get a rent settlement that allowed us to, repair our homes, then that would have a much bigger impact for our residents altogether. So being part of that conversation that really explained the impact. And I think that's one of the things we can do, because we house 1 in 10 Londoners and we build, 1 in 4 homes, as a sort of sector. Is showing the impact of our model and our finances if things operate in certain ways, and explaining that to different officials to make sure that they get the consequences of various actions. So it has been very difficult, but we've shown that we did some research with Savills that showed that actually that we built 1 in 4 homes between 2016 and 2021. And so whilst people think, well, there's the for-profit sector or local authorities who are now building homes, which is true, without housing associations, we're not going to build nearly enough affordable homes. So, we're an important part of that equation. And I think the other thing has been really amplifying the voice of our residents. We did a lot around, cost of living crisis, and calling for, social security support to increase in line with inflation, which was successful, and, really ensuring the voice of our residents was out there, the impact it would have on them, the impact it's already having on them. Mm-hmm. And also increasingly getting people to understand the focus on investing in our existing homes. There's been all this work around developers contributing, ensuring that the quality of the homes they've built are remedied when there are failures around building safety. And what the impact is if we're spending money remediating failures, which we are doing, that is going to have an impact on what we can invest in our existing homes, and really getting that message across. We're capped in terms of our income. There's only so much we can do. So if we have to prioritise, we're going to have to prioritise safety, and that means other things are going to fail. And we need to have more conversations around regeneration and how we deal with poor quality stock and how we're going to build our homes and where the money is going to come from. And I think, what I'm most proud of is that we've spent the last 2 years explaining that and giving real positive information around what we can do, but only if we're supported.
Yeah, and do you think the message is getting through? Because clearly, my reflections over the last 2 years is, and certainly what I'm seeing in the last 6 months specifically, is that development across the country is on the decline, unfortunately. Yeah. And so what do you think we can do to continue that messaging? And I suppose what can we do to make sure that we still focus on development? Because with some of the housing associations in the country, with the financial restraints that they've got, they're struggling to do the basics, let alone think about development. But how do we create more homes, and how do we solve that problem, would you say?
Well, I think, part has got to be clear messaging. So, and that's showing we're not crying wolf. Actually, as a G15, we have decreased our programmes 30 to 40%, and as the biggest developers in the country, that is going to have an impact. So, it isn't, we've said it before, we can't build as many homes, we carry on. This time we really can't. There's nowhere left to go. And, developers are saying they can't. There has to be better, planning is a problem. Getting planning consent is a problem. Consistently changing how we do things is a problem. We are talking with one message, that numbers are going to decrease. There's the economic backdrop. We're seeing
Absolutely.
a very stubborn inflation figure, aren't we? And that inflation figure is going to impact on interest rates, and that interest rates will impact on people's ability to borrow and do what they can. So in those situations previously, where the private sector can't do as much, the public sector have come in, or housing association, independent sector, we've been able to come in and say, right, we can fill that gap, we can keep things going, we can do more rental homes, because as I said, we've had this housing crisis, we need to build more homes. So, but we can't do that anymore. So if developers can't do it and we can't do it, who is going to do it? And for a lot of build to rent, they can't do it because the interest rates are such, it's not going to give the returns that they need for their investors.
Absolutely.
So who's going to do it? There has to be a change in the model of how we fund homes, and there has to be support for house building. It has to be seen as a good thing.
Absolutely.
Building homes for people is a good thing for the country. It's a good thing for people who need a home. And so we need to talk positively about it to get that change, because we do, we need changing of funding models, we need changing in planning, but most of all, we need the ambition and desire to have house building front and foremost in terms of what we do as a country, don't we?
Yeah, totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that's why I love the G15, and clearly, like, the way that operates is very, very much akin with the rest of the world and the rest of the market. So I think, how has it been working in tandem with government, and how, if you had to give some advice for Fiona, who's coming into that role, what would be some of the key things you'd say, and some of the key things you'd give her and pass on to her to try and really impact change in the next 2 years in her tenure?
I think what we've tried to do is not just complain, but say this is how things can be done. I think part of the successes have been by us showing, working with the officials, government officials, around modelling. What's the impact here? What would work? What wouldn't work? So. And I think we're very collaborative. We do work well together. Fiona's very experienced. She's been in housing a long time, so she kind of understands the environment. And so I think it is really trying to always find solutions and more joined up. I'm talking a lot to people around. If you want better quality homes, you have to think about decarbonisation funding, regeneration funding, the affordable homes programme. You can't do all of this in little slices. What we need is give us the funding, tell us the outcomes, and we'll show you how we can make the most of it and change some of the rules, for goodness sake. We can build more homes by getting rid of this silly rule and that silly rule, and local authorities too, and they've been quite successful with some of the rule changes they want, because government does want answers, does want help. It's not working in isolation. It kind of wants organisations and sectors to help them, find the most efficient way to get things done. So I think, it's keep coming up with solutions.
Absolutely. And I notice, and one thing I was going to talk on a bit later, but we might as well cover it now, is just that you've really pressed forward. And I know that I think you and Fiona are the same in terms of really challenging the norm and really, really making sure you commit to the development programme. But talk us a little bit through the JV, because I saw that you've done a joint venture with Legal and General Homes. Like talk us through how that's going to work and what the impact's going to be in terms of your development programme.
Yeah, I think, we've always tried to work in partnership. And, when I talked about setting up Fizzy, which was about build to rent sector investment coming in, L&G are incredibly committed to, the nation's housing. Yep. And they're doing that through their modular factories. They're doing that through their commitment to build to rent for affordable housing. For us, L&G, we're a really credible partner to joint venture with, because They have the same values as us, and they want to ensure good quality homes are provided for the long term. So the joint venture is really around, I think with all joint venture partners, you start, and then once you start, you see what else you can do together.
Absolutely.
So it's a start, really, and it's sort of 500 homes a year that we're sort of committing. A large part of that will be shared ownership, because that fits their model. But that opens up, schemes which will have rental as well, because you've got to have a model which has multi-tenure.
Absolutely.
And we will be working in partnership with them. So that's whether that's finding the land, developing the homes, and either owning and managing those ourselves, or working with other housing associations or partners who can do that for them. And we think that as soon as we start working together and start finding opportunities, we'll find different ways of financing and doing this as well, because good partners find solutions. That's the bigger thing, I would say. We want to start, but we want to find bigger solutions as well.
Yeah, and have you done anything, or where's your view on the modern methods of construction? Because I know L&G have focused some of their attention into that world as well. Have you had much experience with that at this stage, or is that something in your roadmap?
We have done some, but I think it's same issues everybody says. It's making sure it can be done where there's the volume, where the price point can come down, where it's mortgageable, so it's kind of building it up. And at the moment, we've got a housing industry which is stop, start, stop, start. So to make a real success of it, you have to have that flow through, don't you? You have to have that kind of confirmed.
It's all about scale, isn't it? That's the thing.
Forward programme of homes, and those that are going to meet it. So I think we'll learn a lot from them, from what they've achieved, and that they'll learn a lot from us as well around affordable housing.
Yeah, exactly. And I know we talked about this a little bit off camera, but just in terms of what you think some of the levers we can pull within maybe government, but what are some of the things that are going to need to happen for us to develop much needed homes in the country, do you think? I know you mentioned planning, but what are some of the other things, and how can we overcome some of these challenges, do you think?
I think it's, as I said, I think a will to make it work. Funding, if we're going, lots of people say, help us think of a way of building more social rented homes without more funding. There is not a way to build more social rented homes without more funding. We have to be prepared to subsidise it either through the land or, through grant programmes. It doesn't work in any other way. So that means, I've always said we should have housing as infrastructure projects, that they need to be seen over the long term, and funding needs to be available over the long term. We're going into, as I said, an environment, who knows in terms of interest rates and how high and how long that's going to be. Any help to lower funding costs, that for local authorities and for housing associations is always welcome. Let's think a bit differently about that. Making sure that public land is available for social housing, and it's not just about best, price, but about best value, which is really around, can we utilise that for better public good, and have that subsidy so we can compete for public land. So I think there's lots of small things. I don't think it's one thing, but I think there's lots of small things we need to do to prioritise it. And we need to keep organisations in good shape and ready for it. And having stop start doesn't help, because you're kind of always looking at your workforce, you're looking at your supply chains, you're looking at all of this, and it's very difficult, which is why we always say it should be like infrastructure projects, because it's got to be able to give that commitment long term in order to be able to get the most out of your home. So in volume. So I think all of those things will really help.
Yeah. And what about land? Because obviously it's a big problem at the moment for a lot of organisations. But how do we unlock more land, and how do we unlock more places that we can build homes that are much needed? Because I think the argument is that, you know, people don't want a housing development in their back garden, but likewise, without that, we can't solve the crisis. But what have you seen in that availability for land and how we could unlock more land across the country?
I think we do have to be braver, you know, around, you know, the fact that a lot of the green belt is scrubby, not very attractive land that we could easily release, you know, would be helpful. You know, new towns take a long time, but you can have extensions, so you can make sure the development is very focused in a particular area rather than randomly. That's good planning. We've got a whole load of estates within our you know, organisation where we could build more homes, we could regenerate them and have better quality as well as new homes, but we need the right funding package in order to do that. And that's a win-win for the community as well, for people who are already living in those homes. They think they can get an improved home as well. So that's a double win. So I think it's really around, you know, local authorities, if they have targets, they have to have a land supply. That was a good thing. You know, people knew what was allocated land and what was unallocated, and then to change it all and say local authorities don't need targets, and, you know, that gets rid of all those years of looking at land supply in an area and how you're going to utilise it. So I don't, you know, sometimes there are things that work, just don't get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, let's build on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we just look at Met Thames Valley for a minute and just look at the helicopter view, just give us the size and shape of the business as it stands today, because I know through mergers and all sorts of things that you've done over the years, it's grown and grown and grown and grown. But where do we stand today?
So we've got about 60,000 homes.
Yeah.
We have, you know, we do all sorts of things. So we've got quite a lot of shared ownership. Key worker housing, where we work with hospital trusts, 8 different hospital trusts providing homes, which is fantastic because it allows people to recruit nurses from abroad where they don't have anywhere to live, and Absolutely. They land in one of our homes, and, you know, they settle before they move on. You know, we've got leaseholders that have bought outright. We've got renters. We do commercial activities as well, you know, market sale, and we have a number of joint ventures. You know, with some big partners like Vistry Countryside, Hill, you know, where we're doing regeneration but also new homes. So, you know, we've got a big portfolio. We work in London, we work in the sort of surrounding area of London, Berkshire, Surrey, Hertfordshire. We work up into Cambridge and then into the Midlands, East Midlands, around Derby and Nottingham. So that's our kind of geography. Yeah, we also do quite a lot in that care and supported housing space. You know, huge need for supported housing, absolutely huge need for supported housing. And that's people with, you know, mental health challenges, homelessness, older people, you know, people who need care. So, you know, we also domestic violence, refugees, and we have a migration foundation as well, which works with destitute migrants.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was reading about that this morning, and it's really fascinating. But tell us a little bit more about the foundation, because it's fascinating, the work, but also I probably was a little bit unsure. I didn't realise there was such a massive problem in that area, being honest. So talk us a little bit more about the Migration Foundation.
Yeah, so there was a merger many years ago with a housing association called Refugee Housing. So Refugee Housing was set up, as the name says, to support refugees. And so through the merger, there's a retained fund, which is the foundation, which is really to support migrants and refugees. And there's a massive problem. There are state-funded programs, but we have the flexibility to do things which we think is right. Without necessarily having the government, you know, sort of funding that we have to sort of, you know, make sure we tick those boxes. So it means we can work in communities, support people who can then find employment or haven't got appropriate housing. So we can help them with their housing. We can help them move on to more successful employment careers. We work with, you know, like the local supermarkets who give food for people who, you know, don't have any money or don't have, you know, the means of which they can buy food to feed themselves. We support people to gain skills and help them on their way, as well as working with smaller organisations that are very, you know, connected to communities who need funding. So it's not just about funding ourselves to do the work, but funding other organisations that work with migrants and refugees. And, you know, even if you look at the waves and, you know, Afghan, Syrian, Ukrainian, there's a massive crisis really of appropriate support and housing for migrants only in the recent past, let alone, you know, before that. So, you know, it's really valuable work that we do, but it's small scale compared to what's required, but it's very focused.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I suppose the other thing I was looking at that from there's so many challenges, isn't there, especially centered around housing from that perspective. And like you said, the supported housing, like I recently read something, like we're absolutely nowhere near where we need to be in supported housing. Yeah. Just in terms of like, interested to understand the scalability of what you've done with the business, because you must sometimes look back and think, how did we arrive at this point in such a big organisation? But how has the scalability been in terms of how you've created the right leadership team, how you've created the right, because I'm presuming that you've had to change your leadership style over that period of time as well to adapt to how big the organisation's become. But what have been some of the key things to make sure that you've scaled the culture, of Met Thames Valley, and also changed and developed your leadership team to make sure that it can support all of the activities that you're doing as a business?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big change. I think scale and size of organisation requires different leadership and management. You know, some people are much better in smaller organisations because they like to be able to touch and feel everything, and the bigger the organisation is, you can't do that. You know, you have to rely on other people, you have to rely on your systems and processes, and, you know, sort of especially with different mergers that happen over the years, how do you get that one culture in an organisation? You have to really work at it. Mm-hmm. And as time changes and priorities change, you need different people for different stages of the organisation. You know, if you're going through a big merger, you may need people who are really focused on helping people through a transition or a change process. And when you're in a stable position and you want to focus on, you know, really on your services and your transformation of your services, you might need more people who really understand the systems and the processes together with the services. You've got to really work out where your strategy and vision is as an organisation, and then the kind of people you need to be able to lead that, and with that, you know, the kind of leadership to help them do that. And that also comes from the board, because I see the board and the executive team very much as you know, we're a combined unit. We're here together to really lead the organisation. So, you know, you don't want to keep swapping and changing your strategy because people come and go. You need to make sure you're really all up for it, and then making sure you have very good plans in place for how you're going to do it and what happens if something, you know, comes in your way, what can go, what your key risks are as an organisation. So a lot of planning, but I think it's for me, it's commitment. You know, it's like people who are passionate and committed, like whatever comes our way, that we'll find a way through it, and we will, you know, make sure that we can be flexible, that we understand, you know, change is coming, there's always going to be change, and we're always going to have to flex what we do depending on the circumstances. And, you know, building really strong teams that are behind that, who want to work together, who really, you know, understand the sort of values of the organisation and committed to those values. And I don't mean that just in like can repeat them, you know, off the top of their head, but kind of really live them and understand why they're there and what they're there for. And so I think there's nothing more important than leadership during these difficult times, you know, at all levels of the organisation, because it's tough and people need to be resilient as well, but they need to have good leaders, and they need to be able to lead them themselves. And that's more so in you know, It's true of every organisation, but when you have very big organisations, you've got to make sure that's embedded, those leadership styles and ways of working, and communication really embedded in all your people in the organisation.
Yeah, and the one thing that really I've got a gripe with at the moment is I feel as a sector we lose people to the private sector and they leave our sector. What can we do more of? I'm not talking just about your organisation now, but what can we do more of around talent development in our sector to stop that happening? There's been such great leaders leave our sector and go into other areas. We've got to retain that talent within the housing sector for sure.
I think, equally we attract a lot of people from
of course,
other sectors and from the private sector as well. And I think that's good when people move backwards and forwards across sectors, because it shows, what I've said, that it's about leadership and values. And you can, it's not like the social housing sector has all the values and the private sector has all the money. Just kind of, there are values in good private sector organisations that care, and, as well as housing associations. So, movement across and ideas between sectors is really important. But I think it's all about good jobs. It's about making sure you focus on the individual as well as the role. What do they need? How can they grow? What more can you give them in the organisation? And I think that's really important. It's a two-way relationship, isn't it? People will leave if they don't feel they're being developed, if they don't think there's anything there.
Of course.
And I think, that we're lucky. We do lots of different things in our organisation, and you don't need to pigeonhole people into you're a development person or you're a management person.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Really good to try and get movement between different bits of the organisation, different roles in the organisation. So I don't think it's, some people are just driven by money. They'll do better in the private sector. But, most people want a good work-life balance. They want, the organisation to have a good sort of social purpose. And we've got that in buckets. So, I think we're an attractive sector, but sometimes I think people do need to step out, move across, and then come back again. We've seen that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
They say, go, learn something, bring it back, and we'll be here with open arms to learn more from what you've learned as well. So,
well, I saw that you recently took a non-exec role at Redrow. Is that right?
Yeah, I haven't started it yet, but I do shortly. Yeah.
But I think that's so important as well. I think one thing we can do is through non-executive roles is support leaders to go and get some experience from the private sector or wherever, or other organisations. But that's really important. What's been some of the things that you've learned over the last 30 years that you would give to some of your leaders? What's some of the bits of advice that you would give, and some of the key nuggets, I suppose, that people looking to get into leadership should think about?
I think it's really about putting your head above the job you do and thinking, into the future, like outside of the remit of what you do. So I think there's lots of people very good at what they do. But to sort of step up to the next role or to be really good leaders, they need to understand a broader landscape. So I would always say, readers, and in today's world, how great is it? You can get so much information. People are so open, aren't they? There's so much you can do. So I would say learn as much about the sector, the organisation, the roles that you want to step into. Talk to people who are doing them. Learn about what it is that they really need within that. Have secondments, or just a day role, allow people to kind of step into your shoes or learn about what you do and how you do it. And I think just always that little bit outside your comfort zone, and that takes courage, always, doesn't it? It's like you think, I'll never do this. I never do this. Amount of times I've gone and thought, I can't do this. But somebody else usually encourages you to do it. So they see what you don't see. Believe them when they say you can do this, and step out of your comfort zone and, try things. And what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? You don't get the job, you don't like it, you can always go back and do something differently. So I'd say always push yourself slightly outside your comfort zone, and have strong belief in yourself and the organisation. Make sure you're the right fit. Yeah. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I didn't get a job," and I say, "Well, actually, are you the right fit for that organisation, or are you? You'd be much better off over there, or much better off in here, because actually, different people work in different ways, and it's not that what they do isn't right. It's just they're not quite right for the organisation. So sometimes you have to learn, for me, what kind of organisation is going to be right for me, and how would I operate in that kind of environment. So learn as much, do as much, and challenge yourself as much as you can.
How important I've always thought this, how important's mentorship been in your career for you personally, and how important do you think it is for the next generation of leaders coming through to make sure they're getting that mentorship, that coaching, that support from other leaders of our sector?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I've been quite lucky. I've had line managers or chairs that have been very good mentors for me. Okay. And I have had an external coach, so at set periods of time in careers, if I've changed jobs or I want to think something through, I've had a coach that's been there for me. And at first I thought, I don't really understand all of this, but then you get, after a session, you get the value from it. You think, okay, that's really helped me. I can see how that can help somebody else. So and just that space to talk things through with someone else outside your team, or in a different organisation who can help guide you. And I've done that quite a lot for people, and so I think if you can, it's a really good thing to do. And don't be afraid to then use them. Don't be too timid with them. Try and get as much as you can out of them if you get that opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's a good thought. And a couple of last things. The first one is, and I think this is improving in our sector, but the next generation of talent coming through. We talked about how you got into the sector. 95% of the people I speak to fell into our sector. I think we cover a lot and tick a lot of boxes now. Planet, young people coming through and the next generation of talent coming through are asking different questions than they used to. It's not about money. It's about fulfillment. It's about planet. It's about sustainability. It's about all the other things that our sector's really, really akin to. How do we sell the opportunity better, and how do we get that next generation of talent coming through and the next generation of leaders coming through in this sector, do you think?
I think we have to be open to taking people who have the right attitude but not necessarily all the right skills, and training them. Because I see that a lot with young people. They just don't have the experience because they're young, and they need. So I think we can do more around hiring for attitude, and then skilling people up in those areas. And I think sometimes it's really, and it has been very tough. There's I think quite a lot of negative press and stigma around some of the things we do. So we have to make sure we get our own press out there about, the positives, so that we are attractive and people understand that, we have our own story. We don't have to rely on other organisations to have that story. So I think, getting your story, your positives, communication, I think, more than ever, we have to be good organisations that are good communicators in terms of the image we put out there, and the how we communicate internally, so people see what we're doing as well, even if they don't work in a bit which is directly customer focused or relatable to them, so they can see, okay, I work in an organisation, I might be in finance, but actually this is what I'm doing. Yeah. So, really kind of comms, I think, is becoming more and more important about how we communicate with our colleagues internally as well as externally in terms of that. And showing the range of jobs there are. I think, property sector's doing that a lot, isn't it? It's not just, if you're in house building, you're not just a bricklayer, there are all these different jobs that you can do. And I think we've got such a range of jobs in our organisation. And once you're in, there's lots of ways of moving around and doing different things. So showing that, that span of what we do, and how easy it is to move around actually when you're in, and how many people move within the organisation and get promoted within is also a good news story.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the channel that we use as well. So sometimes we're very traditional in the way we get our messages out. And I think the next generation, my daughter's 13, and she wouldn't, I'm sure when she looks for a job, she won't go on a job board or onto Inside Housing and look for a role. I think we've got to go to them on their channel, to be honest. And
yeah, that'll be interesting.
We might see the TikToks of this world coming through. I think.
The thing is, by the time you've mastered it, they've gone on to something else. So,
exactly, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And final thing for me, I mean, what do you think, it's probably twofold this question, what do you think the future of the sector looks like, short term, medium term? And I suppose, what do you still want to achieve in your career and with Met Thames in terms of the next chapter? Just interested to see where you think we're heading as a sector, and also where you think you'd like to take your career and organisation in the short term.
I think we've been around for many years as a sector. If you look at the Peabodys and Guinnesses and Octavians that have been around for over 100 years, we've been around for over 60 years. So we're long-term organisations, and sometimes we take the lead, sometimes somebody else takes the lead. Yeah. And I think that's fine. I think that's fine. You've got to say, I'm here for a long term. I don't need to, we don't have a share price that we have to kind of bolster. We can make long-term decisions, and that's important because, we need to make the right decisions for our customers and people who we've yet to house. So I think, that's the first thing is, make the right decisions, make long-term decisions, because we're just stewards of these organisations. I've been lucky enough to come in, be a chief exec for 15 years, first at Thames Valley, then Met, and then at Met Thames Valley. So, we are just stewards, and somebody else comes along and takes it to a new chapter. And so, short term, we've got, like every organisation at the moment, there are chopping waters. We've got economic indicators that aren't going the right way. We haven't got enough money to do what we want to do. We can't do everything, and we have to prioritise, and that's difficult. And it's difficult for our staff, particularly our frontline staff, who are dealing every day with huge increases in demand, and we can't meet that demand. I think when you talk to people in service in all industries, they're feeling it, whether it's the police or social services, teachers, the NHS, the demand is just through the roof. We just don't have the resources to deal with the demand in the way we would. So short term, that's difficult, but that will change. Things will move on. We will be around, and we will be around to do what we do, which is really, helping and managing and investing in our existing homes and building new homes for the future for those where the market doesn't work. That's what we're here for, and we'll carry on doing that. And I think, what we're looking at, and I think quite a few organisations, is, that more strategic asset management, how we, if we're not going to have the money to invest in all our assets in the way we want to, then where do we want to operate? What properties will we keep? Will we, sell to invest back into the organisation? And partnerships, so we've had different kind of organisations that's in favour. So we will work with local authorities, we will work with the for-profit providers, we will work, with other housing associations. So for me, it's not really about who does it or how, it's really about how we meet those nations' needs, and we will work in whatever partnership or in whatever way to achieve that sort of end result. So I think for me, it's really about stabilising through this period, which is going to be rocky, which is difficult, influencing to show these are the things we can do as an organisation, making sure internally we run with what we've got control of to help us through this sort of period. And having that vision for the long term, we're still there. We'll work with anyone. We'll get it done. We're ready to partner with anybody who wants to talk to us about supported housing, around more homes, around communities, around regenerating areas. We're there to sort of to be a forceful partner to make things work and to find new ideas and ways of doing it. So just to keep going, really.
Amazing. I mean, thank you so much for giving us some of your insights. I think a phenomenal leader within our sector, and someone that I think everyone looks up to, and an organisation that everyone's really proud to have as part of our sector. And I'm sure Fiona has got big shoes to fill in the G15 and that role. And I really look forward to tracking your journey as a leader, but also as a business. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Really nice to talk to you.
You too. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.